Hello everyone and welcome to the Hockey Hub. So today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the Toronto Maple Leafs offseason. Now Toronto, in my opinion, has had a very good offseason. They've addressed a lot of their critical needs like defense and grit. Now obviously they also lost some pieces to get there. So what I'm going to be doing today, and what I'm going to be doing for all 7 Canadian teams, is I'm going to look individually at their draft, at their free agency, and the trades they made, and break that down on a step-by-step basis. So we're going to start with the draft. Now, I think Toronto had an interesting draft, to say the least. Everybody wanted them to pick a defenseman, and they ended up going with a smaller Russian forward in Rodin Amirov. Now, I think Rodin Amirov has the potential to be a possible steal from this draft. He's one of the more unknown prospects of the first round, obviously playing in Russia and the lack of scouting in the later part of the year due to COVID. I think Amirov has a lot of high-end potential. There's always that risk of, will he ever come over to the NHL, because the KHL contracts and everything. But yes, the Leafs didn't necessarily get bigger in the draft, and I know a lot of people wanted that, but they ended up picking, talented, smaller forwards, and that made a lot of people mad. But I don't think that's a real problem for Toronto, because they're trying to get bigger right now. They're trying to win right now. Drafting a guy like Braden Schneider, for an example, he's not going to play this year. He probably isn't going to play next year either. So yeah, Schneider is a big right-handed defenseman. He fits that need, but he fits it 3 or 4 years from now. He's not going to play immediately. He doesn't help them immediately, which their window is probably right now. So I think they still had a decent draft. Nothing to write home about. Amirov, that's kind of one of those boom or bust picks. I think he'll probably be a decent second line or maybe even first line forward. So overall, Toronto's draft, I would probably give a B-. They didn't, get those needs that could help them later down the road, but they did add skill, and that's always important. Getting the best players in the draft is important. If you're picking at 15, then that's if the best player is in your lap at 15, then you have to go with that player. Now, moving on, I'm going to move on to the trades they made. Now, Toronto made a few interesting trades by trading away Kasperi Kapanen and Andreas Johnsson. Now, to start, I really like the Johnsson trade because Johnsson's contract, for what he provided last year, was a little hefty. He definitely took a step backwards, and I think Johnsson is a good third or maybe second line player, but he was really getting pushed down the Leafs depth chart, and it's probably best that they moved on from him. Now, the Kapanen trade, I think, is an absolute steal for Toronto. Kapanen is a very streaky player, and he was a player that frustrated a lot of Toronto Maple Leafs fans this past season, and getting a first-round draft pick and a prospect back for him, I think is very good for Toronto. It freed them up some cap space, it gets them a player that hopefully will replace Kapanen in the future, in Rodin Amirov, and overall, I think it's a solid trade, and maybe changes up some of that lackadaisical attitude in Toronto's locker room, because apparently, there's a few attitude issues with Kapanen. Sometimes we've seen that on the ice as well. So the Kapanen trade, I think, was a good one for Toronto. Getting Joey Anderson back for Andreas Johnsson, I think, is good as well. Anderson projects as a solid third liner, which Toronto needs that good forward depth, and I think Anderson is going to fit in well in Toronto, and I think he's going to be a player Maple Leafs fans really like. Now, free agency is where Toronto really generated a lot of buzz. Now, obviously, they signed Joe Thornton recently to a 1-year league minimum contract, and I think people are making a bigger deal out of that than it seems, because it's Joe Thornton, because Jumbo Joe in the 6 and everything. But Thornton is not even close to the player he once was. He's slow. His game has become very ugly, quite frankly. It's a lot of slashing. He just can't keep up with it as well anymore. He's still a decent player, but Toronto needs to be careful of what role they're asking him to play. He cannot be a good third-line center at this point. He's 30 points, he's going to take a lot of penalties, and he does add grit, which is big for them. He adds grit, he adds locker room experience. So I do like the signing for Toronto, as long as they utilize Thornton the right way. If they're asking him to be too much or asking him to be anything of his former self, I think Toronto fans are going to be disappointed. They also re-signed Jason Spezza, which to me is a little confusing because Thornton kind of fills that Spezza role now. I know, obviously, not the grit part, but having Thornton and Spezza, hopefully they're not playing on the same line, because that would be a very slow line. And other teams, they might just blow past those guys. But once again, it's a 1-year league minimum contract. I don't think it's a risk for Toronto to keep Spezza. At worst, he's the 13 forward. So I don't mind that. They signed Jimmy Vesey, which I think is a very smart, under-the-radar signing. Vesey is a solid two-way player that can score 30 points, 15 goals in a regular season. They got him for a very cheap 1-year deal contract. He should fit in as that third-line energy winger type of player that they need. He can play on the penalty kill and is a useful utility player for Toronto. And then there's the signing of Wayne Simmonds. Now, Wayne Simmonds is another player that fits that exact need for Toronto. He can play on the fourth or third line, he can provide grit, he can hit, he can fight, and he could probably still score about 10 or 15 goals. Simmonds, obviously, once again, is not the player he once was. He's not that, first or second line power forward that will score 30 goals and hit and fight and score a Gordie Howe hat trick every third night or something. So he's not that level of player anymore, but if Toronto puts him in the right spot, which I think they're capable to do with their forward depth, I think he should be a very useful addition for them and fill a need and hopefully, maybe protect guys like Matthews who has struggled with injury, or Tavares, or players like that. So I like getting Simmonds for them. Now, they also signed Zach Bogosian in free agency, so we're switching over to their defense now. So Zach Bogosian for a 1-year, $1 million contract. Bogo is a solid bottom-pairing shutdown defenseman with some grit. Once again, Toronto is looking for that grit. So I do like the Bogosian signing for them. Obviously, he's not going to play too high up in their lineup, injuries aside. So I think Bogo will fit in well with Toronto. Obviously, he does make the odd defensive lapse. He's not no stalwart on the back end, but provides some grit, a little bit of intimidation. And then their big signing this offseason, and the one that I think was the best move for them, was TJ Brodie. Now, I think Toronto dodged the bullet by not signing Pietrangelo and adding another massive contract to their roster. Signing Brodie is a more low-key signing that should pay off very well for Toronto. Brodie is a very solid defensive defenseman that can provide some offense, 30 to 35 points in an 82-game schedule. He does play, even though he's a left hand, he does play the right side, which that's Toronto's area of weakness. That's what they need. So Brodie is a perfect fit for Toronto. They got him at a decent $5 million, I believe, 4-year contract. So it's not an albatross contract that's going to hold them back. Toronto really took a different approach to their offseason this year. They got the pieces that they needed instead of going out and getting the big sexy signing that will make everybody happy, or getting a Tyson Barrie, which didn't really fit a need for them. They looked at their team and said, okay, what are the holes in our lineup? They needed to get tougher. They needed to get more defensively responsible. So what did they do? They signed good two-way players like Vesey, grit players like Simmonds and Thornton, and good defensive defensemen like Brodie and Bogosian. The trades they made, I think, were solid as well. They got back good value for what they were giving up. And overall, I don't think that they got a lot better, but I think that they seriously improved their overall roster and the makeup of their team by addressing those needs and working on the stuff that they actually needed to work on, instead of just getting, another player that they didn't necessarily need but would make everybody excited because, they put up a lot of offensive totals or stuff like that. I think they had a very smart offseason, and I would grade Toronto's offseason at an A-. Considering the little cap space that they had to work with, what they were able to add and get out for good returns, I think was a very solid overall offseason. I think Toronto fans should be very excited about the future of their team, and possibly with the grit that they've added and the more defensive presences, they might be able to actually win a round in the playoffs that year. And that's the big question with Toronto. We all know they'll have a good regular season again, but when it comes to playoff time, they have not been able to get it done. And maybe adding these pieces actually helps them beat a team like Boston or Columbus, because they have that grit and that defensive presence to keep up with them now. But they need to play like it, because Toronto has had good defensemen. I don't think their defense on paper is bad, but it's their team defense that leaves goaltender Frederik Andersen out to dry. Speaking of goaltending, they also added Aaron Dell and Michael Hutchinson, but those guys are likely minor league starters for them, so I don't look too much into those signings, since to me Jack Campbell is still the number 2 on their goalie depth chart. But yeah, so I would give Toronto an A- for their offseason. So that does it for today's video. I'm going to be doing Ottawa soon as well, since I'm going to, do the top ranked team from when I ranked the Canadian division and the bottom and work the way up to the middle. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. please leave a like, comment, and hopefully subscribe. And I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.